I mean, what is it that we are now doing to the planet through our own consumption, and the reasons and the choices that we make? And so, Paul, perhaps you'd like to introduce the next speaker, and then we'll run on through to Chef Connor Spacey, who's going to present his ideas on avocados and why he doesn't serve them in his restaurants. And then we're going to provide some solutions. But Paul, I'll leave you to intro our next speaker.
No problem. Thank you, Arthur. And it's so great to be able to welcome Professor Karina Hawkes. Karina has spoke at the Chef's Manifesto, I think, Action Hub in London at Onved Gardens maybe 2 years ago. I think you were last there in person maybe 2 years ago. And we sat outside just next to the glass house in the sun. And I remember sitting in a small circle, listening intently as you shared so many insights from your work. And so, Karina, you have so many years of experience in the area of food policy with the City of London, at City University, teaching it. People come from all over the world to learn with you. Today we're wanting to talk a little bit just around this idea that we've been just talking about around how do we generate successful and effective policy around green commodities. And so I just wanted to see what your initial reactions, thoughts were as we kind of open this conversation up.
Sure. Well, thanks very much for the invitation to be here today. It's great. So it's a shame we're not sitting in that wonderful place in person, but really a pleasure and honour to be here. And it's been interesting listening to what's been said before. I think on the policy side on green commodities, there's a few ingredients that are necessary. And the first one is political commitment. That governments at all levels, international, regional, local and national, need to get this and have that political commitment. And that political commitment can be created. Of course, if you have political champions in governments, that's fantastic. If not, then you need to get your advocates and people such as this group here making a noise that politicians will see it as advantageous to develop policy. Another aspect is around having a policy framework. So when you think about all of these different issues, public procurement, waste, public awareness, nutrition issues, that you need to have a framework that says we care as a government about health and sustainability around food. And these are all the different tools that we can use in government to make that happen. And that doesn't tend to happen. They tend to be sort of sprinkled all over government. It needs to be brought together. Then you need to get the financing sorted out. So when you look at how money is spent at the moment, it's much more likely to be spent on crops that aren't really bringing that many benefits, the types of businesses, the types of skills that aren't going to be advancing this agenda. And then you need to think about what level of public policy needs to be at. It can be international, it can be national, but it also can be at the city or municipal or local level. And I think that's where we see some really exciting moves right now, is at this more city level or local level of cities finding, or local authorities finding entry points to say, these are some changes that we want to make in our locality. And we know that our local citizens care. We're going to do something. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I like the way that you laid that out. And I mean, at the moment, we've been spending a bit of time together on the UN Food Systems Summit, particularly in Action Track 1. Now, today we're really probably focusing more on 2, but this is where the overlap occurs in the way that these conversations connect. And so as we've been talking a little bit more around the specific area of support for nutritious diets using local supply chains. So what should people, from your experience, people like you and I, do to support nutritious diets using local supply chains?
Sure. Well, I think there's so many actions that need to be taken in the system, and the UN Food Systems Summit shows the importance of not acting in silos, but putting the supply side and the demand side together. But where it is the case that people who have the means, have the resources, have the finances, those people, in my view, have a responsibility a strong responsibility to buy healthy and sustainable food from the types of producers such as you get in local supply chains who are themselves adopting responsible practices. What we see, unfortunately, is that even those people with the means, there's still this kind of, well, I can spend a little bit less money on food. I'll spend loads of money on this and that. But on food, you know, I still want to get the cheapest price. It's like a mentality. It's like a mindset. And that mindset needs to shift so that if you do have the means, you say, I'm going to take responsibility to spend the money that I'm fortunate to have a disposable income. I am going to choose to spend it on supporting people who are producing healthy, sustainable food and supporting their livelihoods. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen. People don't take it on as a responsibility, and they should.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that is so critical, this idea of cheap food. And it's something that we want food to be amazing, but we do often then associate it as based on price, and we don't want to pay for it. And so I think it really is critical. There are those, though, that struggle to afford to eat well, and those that aren't able to buy sustainable local produce at a higher price point. What should we do with that? What should we do there? What should they be doing?
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is an issue because most people do fall into that category of struggling to prioritize healthy food when there's so many different complexities in their lives, so many other things to pay for, so many other things to prioritize. So for that group, very large group of people, I think there's amazing opportunities for businesses and new sustainable businesses to say, how can we function as a business, which is important? How can we function as a business to support ourselves, to support our sustainability criteria that matter to us, but also support low-income communities? Are there ways that we can make our supply chains a bit more efficient, if you like, with fewer people in them than the standard supply chains that could actually cut some costs out of the system? Or are there some government programs that could stimulate, such as voucher schemes, that could stimulate and enable that match made in heaven to be made, because it's not always easy. The point is, it might not always be easy, but I do think that with the creative minds and the imagination in the system, that there might be ways of thinking, there are ways that we can do this by having this more direct connection with communities.
Yeah. Just looking at the chat, I just see Alison jumping in with, she said, are we taking the rational, are we talking the rational here versus applying the behavioral lens and the rich emotional insights? And we need both for progress. What's your reaction around this? Because I think you obviously were on the co-chairing the London Obesity Task Force, which obviously was looking at, particularly at a city level, some of this, you know, how do you change? How do you look at the behavior? There's the rational, which is the numbers, the realities for the health system, the impacts. And then there's the behavioral, which is how do people choose what they eat? How do they spend? I know some of the work that we've seen, you know, people will even spend beyond their means to buy things that are worse for them or better for them based on experience, or you know, all these things. How do we bring both of those areas together, and what do you see in the policy world as kind of maybe some of the levers around that?
Sure, yeah, well, the approach that I like to take, and we take in my work at the Centre for Food Policy, is what we call the lived experience lens. So that is about understanding all the complexity of what is influencing what people are eating. And we know that emotional, psychological factors play an important role, just as hard things do, like people have less money or people have less time. So you've got to look at all of that together. But I think often we forget about the more emotional, cultural piece. So, for example, on the low-income group side, you find that when people, if they have sufficient time, if they're engaged in like a community garden type process, but not a community garden that's set up for richer people that they don't connect with, but one which they have ownership of, that they will go to that in order to get a social connection if they experience social isolation. So that provides a social connection. And just as it happens, it's producing healthy food, so they end up eating more healthy, sustainable food. But what they're actually looking for is a social connection. So if we understood that much better, I think we'd be able to leverage that. I think on the higher income side, people don't identify with sustainable local food. They think, oh, they're a bunch of hippies or something sort of a bit insulting like that. But it's like, what I do is I buy expensive things because that's my identity. My identity is not sustainable, healthy food. So you've got to understand and feed into people's idea about themselves, their identities, their cultures, what it takes, what it means to them to be part of society. And we've been really bad at that. We tend to ignore that, and we've really got to start in policy, and we've got to start taking note of that in policy if we're really going to affect change.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so true. And I think this idea of identity, I mean, part of the challenge is that, there's so many things that feed into why we make decisions. And so it is really hard when you're thinking about that. I'm conscious of time. I wanted to understand at a global perspective as well, just how can we incentivize better agricultural practices, improve diets, and all the while still support global trade? So, how do we kind of think about that? There's often these conversations about local and global and things like that, but how do we try and also incentivize these good practices, get the improvement in diet, and also support global trade?
Well, it's a huge question, but if we're talking globally, the answer has to be supporting the infrastructure to support small farmers to produce nutritious foods. The reason I say that is because the data out there suggests that small farmers produce about 30% of our crop output globally, and that amounts to between 50 and 80% of the micronutrients in our food supply, which suggests they disproportionately tend to produce nutritious foods. So we know that they're already producing nutritious foods. The challenge is they face multiple challenges in doing so, including being very poor themselves a lot of the time. But there's a whole issue about the infrastructure required to get those products into markets. So if we, and including global markets, but you don't want to just prioritize global markets, which tend to prioritize farmers with a lot of assets. So if you could crowd more small farmers in, support the development of their infrastructure, you'll find that you can get more small farmers in the system, earning more for producing for a greater range of markets, local, national, and global. And what I've just said here is not new. I mean, there's many people that make this point. We just need to get it done and get it sorted out, because it will have these multiple benefits of enabling healthy nutrition, more sustainable practices, while also being able to feed into multiple types of markets.
Yeah. Look, Karina, this is amazing. I'm going to throw a little bit of left field to you. Okay, so chefs, we've got a lot of chefs on the call tied to the Chef's Manifesto. We've got a lot of others that are really interested in this space. What's the one thing that you would say, being put on the spot, that you think chefs should be advocating for to really drive this shift towards nutritious food? Like, is it something at the city level, the national level, the global level? What's one thing that you think, chefs could gather around and start kind of trying to really ask for?
Wow, that is putting me on the spot, Paul, but I appreciate the question.
I'm throwing you right under the bus. It's great, but I'm like, Karina, what comes to mind? Is there anything that comes to mind? I know you think about this sort of stuff.
Yeah, there is actually, and that is to elevate the understanding about women's role in food systems.
Okay.
Women play important roles across food systems, from feeding their kids to being in the fields, and all the way across processing, working in supermarkets, as well as working professionally in nutrition and jobs in the food industry and so on. And chefs obviously go across genders, and there's a whole issue about women chefs and things as well. But I think highlighting that, because that cuts across everything that we need for healthy nutrition and sustainability. We know that if women had greater decision making and power, no insult to you or any of colleagues who are not women, but that to me is the big cross-cutting issue that if we really to elevate it would really make a difference.
No, thank you. I mean, that is such a critical issue, and it's something that we do, in the Chef's Manifesto really advocate for under the livelihood space, but it's something that we need to keep having front of mind. And I think it does, when you think about, I think there's around, in terms of farming and smallholder farming, I think women disproportionately make up the workforce on most farms, yet the land ownership rights is very, very small. They're mainly working on land that's owned by men. Things like this are really, I think, no longer satisfactory to kind of have in the world that we live in today with what we know and where things are at. And these kinds of things need to be shifted. And from a development perspective, it's absolutely critical and being proven time and time again that those kinds of investments in women and really driving forward change can have an impact from nutrition right through to all kinds of other outcomes. So I think this is, really, really a good point to kind of keep front of mind. Well, thank you, Karina. I know you're very busy at the moment. There's a lot going on, and we're wishing you all the best in the work that you're doing around the summit. Excited to be working with you. Thank you. If you can hang around for a little bit, there might be some questions in the chat, but really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, it's been great to talk to you, Paul, and colleagues. It's great to have been here. Good luck with the rest of the session. I'll stay around for a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Karina. So, Arthur.
Well, so amazing to have so many just brilliant speakers on with so much knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, it kind of gets to a point where you feel full, and the knowledge is still pouring, and you're kind of like, I want to kind of create more space to understand, like even just what Karina was just talking about thinking about the role of women and how we think about the role of women across the food system. That's a whole massive conversation that maybe we need to have a conversation around one of our action hubs at some point, sometime, somewhere, in a more deeper way. I know it has come up over the years and we have talked about it, but it's really important to think about these cross-cutting levers that kind of really bring about change. So
I know it's funny because I always find myself in a fairly balanced environment. I think the speakers we've had today, we've had a good more female speakers than male, and so it never really hits me that in other parts of the world where I visited Ethiopia a couple of years ago, where you see a complete disparity between the masculine and the feminine about food and who's seen to be doing the work around food, who's going out to work or not going out to work, but women still very much in control of their food systems at home and in the field. So you only really see what you kind of see around you rather than opening up the perspective. And I think that's what's great about the Chef's Manifesto is that we have such a global view that we need to keep hammering home that women in food is an essential part of development and education inside food, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Connor, good to see you. We're going to jump to you in just a sec, but I just thought, Arthur, it might be good just to have a quick chat just about, I think we've mentioned this thing called the UN Food System Summit quite a few times. And we've also talked a little bit about that with obviously chefs and a number of others. Gunhild referenced that, Mario, there's been a lot of conversation. I just thought it might be just helpful just to talk briefly about what the summit is, just for anyone who's joined and just to make sure everyone's across that, but also just what some of the things the Chef's Manifesto is doing and how we're kind of, this conversation feeds into some other conversations and some action that's going to happen this year. So, do you think that's helpful, Arthur?
Yeah, well, action is more or less what it is that the Chef's Manifesto needs to be about, not only for this year, but also this decade. We're talking about a decade of action. At the end of this year, 2021, the Food System Summit is going to sort of crash into us with, okay, guys, what does a future food system look like? And if we don't have our voices heard and try and provide actionable points, then it might just be that it sails on past and nothing happens. So I think it's absolutely essential. And that was part of the reason why, Paul, I said, well, why can't we create a sort of pledge? What will chefs action do this year? And I think it's not just for chefs, but people to say, well, I'm going to take action, and I pledge to take action in this way. So it'd be nice to think that we talk about the pledge that we put together for the Chef's Manifesto, and how it can lean into or perhaps even influence the Food System Summit in September.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, this kind of built so the Food System Summit is a Secretary General Summit that's being called, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to really think about food systems as a way of achieving our sustainable development goals. And so it's a conversation about looking at and really elevating through science, what are the big ideas, the big solutions that we can focus on. And as a Secretary General led summit, he's also really asked for it to be a people summit. And so really creating on-ramps for lots of people, from youth to producers to chefs to lots of different people from all around the world to get involved. And so that's where the kind of rubber's hitting the road. And so as part of that, and also part of a conversation that, Arthur, you started talking about, you said the world's on fire, we need to move forward urgently, we need action. We've been kind of saying, well, in the next 9 years now on the SDGs, how do we accelerate action? And so we've sort of said, let's do a conversation this year around what are the areas of the Chef's Manifesto that we need to be acting on more urgently? What are the areas? Like, everyone has different issues that they are passionate about, but what are the areas which are going to really drive forward that change? And how can we create a bit of a pledge with all kinds of chefs and partners around the world to really drive that forward? And so we've got a survey open at the moment where we're asking chefs to share their results, but we're also looking at then conversations like this to feed into that. What are the areas that really expose? Where are the areas we can drive forward? And then the intent is that this will create a document that we can have chefs sign on to and commit to. And when we think about this, we've got a few hundred people involved in this conversation, but just like the other day, I spoke to a group of chefs that works with 30,000 chefs across the Asia Pacific. And they were super interested in what we were talking about. And they were saying, how do we think about this? How can it evolve? And they were sort of talking about the Chef's Manifesto as a framework for that. And so I think as we drive forward, this is where we need to really turn this kind of intent into action. And so alongside, there's lots of dialogues. Connor and the team in Ireland had a food system dialogue. There's lots of dialogues like this where we're talking about the issues. And I can see in some of the questions, some people have said, less talk, more walk. But I think what we're doing is we're talking from the walk. So, what Connor's talking about today is from his experience. What Tom's talking about is from his experience. It's not just they're talking here on the screen. They're talking here because of what they're doing. They're talking and sharing and inspiring people from what they're doing, not from, a theoretical conversation. All of the speakers that have been here are actually out there making it happen. And so what we need is to get them out there doing it, and, Arthur, even the video you showed of food waste, that was how many years ago? It looks like yesterday. You haven't aged a bit, but.
Oh yeah, I'll pay you to say that.
But yeah, you've been advocating for your whole life, in that sense, you've been advocating for years on these issues and continue to. And so I think it's really key that we continue to move this forward. So I'm not going to take up more time, but I just do want to flag the Chef's Pledge. We'll drop the link into the chat for anyone who wants to get on and do that. Please encourage other chefs that to put their views in. We're also going to be reviewing it with scientists and getting their views on it so that we can then compare what the chefs think and the scientists think, and then have a bit of a discussion around it. So more to come on that, but this is really about driving action forward, and these kinds of conversations really feed into that.
And if anyone from the Chef's Manifesto group, chefs out there, hasn't filled in this pledge, please do. We need to hear what actions you're going to take this year so that when we do get to the Food System Summit, we actually can wave a flag and say we have chefs from the Chef's Manifesto taking these actions for change. Right, we need to move forward, Paul, talking about moving forward. Connor, how are you there over in Ireland?
Hi, how are you? How are things?
Good to see you, man. Thank you so much for taking part.
You too. Delighted to be here. It's been a great, really inspiring morning.
So this whole section, Connor, is we blame on you.
What?
The avocados being discussed, but it's not just avocados. I mean, we could be talking about cashew nuts. We could be talking about importing apple. We could be talking about any kind of commodity or food that's imported and having a negative impact on the place that it's grown. But can you present? We're going to run a video, I think, that you presented a little while ago. We're not running a video.
No, we're not running. Yeah, it couldn't go, which is fine. That's okay.
Okay, great. So give us a little bit about avocados, and then we're going to speak to Johnny Jacobs about his experience in Africa and avocados. So thanks, Connor, and I'll leave it to you.
No problem. Thanks, Emil. So I think it's best to start at the beginning. And like avocados are really good for us. They're really healthy, packed with nutrition, packed with vitamins and so on. And what we do here in Ireland, when we make any kind of dish, we would look at every single ingredient and its impact of any ingredient that we use in our kitchens and how that impact can affect the planet, or how it can affect, farmers, or how it can affect pretty much anything across the food system. Avocados in the last probably 20 years have skyrocketed in consumption, tenfold. And they became this superfood that also, I think, with the growth of plant-based diets and the growth of veganism and vegetarianism and so on, really kind of were pushed out there, as a must-have because of the nutritious value that they have. And I was never comfortable with not knowing the history behind avocados in terms of growing and so on. And so we've never used them on our menu because because I haven't been able to find in Ireland a sustainable avocado. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about Mexico. And the reason I'm talking about Mexico is because over half of the avocados consumed globally grow in Mexico. 99% of the avocados that we buy here in Ireland are grown in Mexico. And to highlight the effect of this cool food, and it's going back to what Alison said earlier, like heroes versus villains and nutrition versus nature. Avocados have had a huge effect globally in climate action on how they're grown in Mexico. And if we look in Mexico, there are 32 states in Mexico. I'm going to focus on just one state at the moment because that's where I have most of the numbers from. And as I said, half of the avocados globally are grown here in Mexico. There's a huge water consumption, first of all, to growing these avocados. And currently in one state of Mexico, 3,800 Olympic-sized swimming pools are used on a daily basis to grow avocados. So if we think about that, water usage alone is shockingly high. The vast majority, there's 196,000 football field sizes in this one state are used to grow avocados. And because consumption has grown, more land is needed. So there's a lot of deforestation, which obviously has led to loss of wildlife and habitats as well. And it's had this huge negative effect on global warming, on farming, on water consumption, and pretty much all this energy that's gone in to grow this one fruit, because it's become this cool, this kind of, brilliant superfood that's become this trend that has globally gone, has taken over pretty much globally consumption. And for me as a chef, I think chefs have a responsibility before we make a decision on menus and dishes and so on, to look at every single thing that goes into it. And as Arthur said, we could talk about lots of different things here. There's lots of different food ingredients that we don't use here in food space for these exact reasons, but they are widespread use. And I think chefs play a big role in really understanding what they're putting on a plate. I think chefs need to be responsible for what they're putting on a plate and understand the knock-on effect it has had, such as avocados. And then in turn use that knowledge or that data in discussions like we're having today to ensure that our customer base understand why we're not doing it, you know, and share the knowledge that people can actually see this superfood in a new light and understand that because we've made it a superfood and made it a trend, we've had huge knock-on effects climate-wise globally because of it. And we really need to kind of sit back and look at all that. And as I said, that's the decision here that we've had to make in Ireland, because if any supermarket or any wholesaler here in Ireland will only sell me Mexican avocados. But I do feel that I'm not trying to give avocados a bad light. It's not about that. It's about saying that that's a problem I have here where I am geographically, and for that reason I can't use them. But I don't think that it's a total loss to it all. And there's many different, as we know, like avocados as a fruit has a season like any other fruit. You know what I mean? It can be grown sustainably, but in certain areas it's not. And for the reason that it's become this huge, I think it's worth, it's a staggering amount of billions of dollars every year it's worth just to the Mexican economy. And we really need to think about that. And I know we're going to bring in Johnny Jacobs now, who has worked in many different areas. He's a co-founder of Longevity Development, based in sub-Saharan Africa. And the good thing about what Johnny is doing and the research and investment they make is that they find alternatives. And I think it's very interesting to say that here's a problem that lies in Mexico, but what I love about our food system is here's a possible solution. And I think, Johnny, first of all, welcome. It's
Thanks. Good to see you.
You too. And I was looking on your website and all last night, and I think the work you guys are doing is brilliant. And I know it's not just avocados. I know you started out with mangoes and so on, and you've moved them, and it's very much investing in education, nutrition, community life. Can you tell us a bit about your work with Kenyan avocados as you're focusing on?
Of course, and Connor, really appreciate everyone having me on to talk about this perspective. I'm going to take a very small step back and just talk about mangoes in Malawi for one moment, just because it's very, very relevant. To start at the end of the conversation and to pick up on something you said, it's my very strong belief, our belief in longevity. The problem isn't the fruit. The problem is us. And the problem is the price we attribute, or more accurately, the price we're prepared to pay for what it is we want on our table. And that's why I think that what you guys are doing is incredible work. When it came to mangoes, what we realized was there was this huge trade-off between the needs of rural communities and how that translated out into a market which requires consistent quality, price, supply, and all of those things. And what I think we demonstrated was those things do not need to be mutually exclusive. In a very short space of time in Malawi, in literally the middle of nowhere, we built 2 drip irrigated anchor farms, which were within the top 0.1% of Rainforest Alliance certified farms anywhere in the world, supplying Innocent, Tropicana, Ceres, Dola, everybody with mango and banana pulp for their smoothies, ice cream, baby foods, etc., with 25,000 small farmers also servicing the supply chain, anchored around 2 commercial farms. And the reason I raise that is because of the banana, not because of the mango. I think if you know your history of banana and the banana trade, it's one of the ugliest, most violent trades and supply chains in the world. And yet, in the right context and managed properly on the ground, you can deliver bananas to a market. You can deliver bananas to a Western market for the same pricing point without needing to, as you say, run roughshod over communities and their engagement. And I raise that example at the beginning because when we switch to avocado, you see a lot of the similarities that have certainly plagued sugar historically, bananas historically, and a whole range of other commoditized crops. We focus on the big deal ones. So we focus on avocado because we all read the stories about big farming organizations cutting off water supply underground and diverting rivers to support the farms you're talking about. And part of that is because it's the story of our day because of just how explosive that growth is. And I believe pre-COVID, you were talking about 35% compounded annual growth in the UK alone in 2018. And that's already a mature market. So I feel that if there was one message I wanted to talk about, or one thing that I wanted to emphasize is, it's not the fruit that's the villain. We're the villain. And that's not to call us names. That's to say, if that's the case, how do we affect those pricing decisions? How do we affect those taste and consumer decisions to help people do it in the right way? And so, forgive my slightly long way around of going around your question, but it's very relevant to avocado. We think avocado is a very interesting crop, and it's interesting for two reasons. One main reason for us at Longevity is that it doesn't just have to be grown on a commercial farm. Now, we have very strong views about farming in sub-Saharan Africa, which is our area of expertise. Starting with, we of course support rural food systems, but we don't believe that everyone should be a farmer. You're not a farmer, Connor. And I gather to say that though we could probably go back through your ancestry and find a farmer somewhere, it's probably a little while ago. We need people to drive the truck, to man the warehouse, to do all kinds of other things before we, sometimes it is condemn people to a life of doing something that they don't enjoy. But we like avocados because you can grow them in the village. You can grow them in your back garden. You can grow them anywhere where that soil is right and where you have the right amount of rainfall. As is so often the case with that crop, it's all about meeting the market. There is a vast demand for avocado, particularly in Europe, now growing also in China and India. And therefore, it's massively about how you manage that crop after you pull it off the tree and get it to its market. In our experience, settled supply chains, where you have a collaboration between a commercial operator and a rural organizer or operator, will deliver the most consistency to that rural population, which then allows you to build in some of these educational programs about how you manage your soil, about how you manage your water. So we think that from a market perspective, a Southern Hemisphere avocado producer like Kenya, like Tanzania, has got a very big opportunity in the market. And provided our destinations are clearer about the standards they require, then we can definitely have the best of all worlds.
I think that's fascinating as well. And I'm glad you kind of started back there. And I love that it's very true. We are the problem, not the actual avocado, which is brilliant. And so in terms of the market there, is there obstacles in your way? Is like, in growing, is it because it's such a popular, food, and the demand is so big? I'm curious as to what, is there what are the opportunities in the market there, but what also might be obstacles that can come from that? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think there are already very significant producers supplying, Hass avocado from Kenya into European markets. That's only going to grow because the demand is growing. And as you pointed out, there's only so much water and land everywhere else. And by the way, I also feel, and this goes to the villain question, as long as people are eating the avocados, people are going to keep filling those swimming pools with water to grow avocados. So what is it we should do? Well, we should be insisting on a certain kind of water system. We shouldn't be talking about flood irrigation. We should be talking about drip irrigation. And I think the obstacles, though, here, and I would also distinguish between jurisdictions, is always going to be about infrastructure and human capital. You need to make sure that you're managing your land and your soil properly. You need to, and that includes, by the way, how you are utilizing the entire land space. As I said, we were very proud of our Rainforest Alliance certification, which requires you not only to maintain a third of your area in its natural habitat, but also requires you to maintain a certain population of trees per hectare that you're actually planting on, and a whole host of other things. I think the real challenge for avocado here is post-harvest. Avocados are a delicate fruit, and while we can do all kinds of things to maintain or control a ripening process before it goes to market, sustainable means. Nevertheless, how you handle that fruit matters to when it gets to your menu. And that is to some extent, a generational educational process. In the same way that, and again, I'll use a banana as example, many of the bananas that are grown here in East Africa would never find their way into a supermarket in the United Kingdom, because we have a different view of our quality. And I would say that quality is the area for Western markets that probably will take the most time to develop out here. Though, as I say, there's a couple of very large Kenyan producers who are doing extremely well with that.
I think that's the key as well, isn't it? Because like with bananas and also with avocados, they do come in different shapes and sizes, and it's not this perfect, like pear-shaped, green, smooth skin fruit that we definitely see here in Ireland. When that is not, to me, what picking an avocado from a back garden, in Europe, in Africa, in Spain, France, it's a totally different. And I suppose, is that going to be a problem when it comes to, or maybe not a problem, but is that more of a job for us to educate consumers about different shapes, sizes, and varieties? You know what I mean? Because like what avocado is in a supermarket now is probably, it's one type, and there are many different types of varieties out there.
I'm really pleased you raised that point, because the type is the Hass. Everyone, in Western society is obsessed with a Hass avocado. I can tell you, and any of our, colleagues and listeners who are here, who have traveled here to East Africa, the East African version is very different. It's much bigger, and it's got a much bigger stone, which is, by the way, why our markets in the West don't like it, because we have less fruit mass. But the fruit itself is incredible. It's incredibly creamy, and it's delicious. It's by far my favorite. And I think that is an area of education which we do really well, because I think that I'm originally from the UK, and I've lived here for 12 years now. But I know that with the right kind of campaign, with the right kind of emphasis, people would love the taste of this fruit. And by the way, a lot of circumstances, they may even be prepared to pay a different pricing point for it. And as I'm sure you've been discussing all day, we should not only not be afraid of that, we should welcome that, because it costs money to produce things. And certainly it costs money to produce things the right way. So yeah, I think that would be, I'd encourage anyone, if you were ever traveling out this way during the season, and I'm lucky enough to have a few trees in our garden here, I would really encourage you to sample the fruit, because it's delicious. It's really good.
That's great. And I think as we've had many discussions and constant discussions on all types of food. But for me, I think the whole thing comes back to education. It's about educating, the villain avocado that we see half the world eating coming from Mexico, and the causes that has, to educating on an alternative, more sustainable avocado that can be grown in Africa, that can be grown in Europe, that yes, it will look and taste different, but in a lot of cases taste better, have a lot more flavor, and because it's more of a natural product that's in a season and not being eaten out of season and grown in some ways like that. Johnny, thanks so much. I think I would talk to you all day, but I know I'm conscious of time and jumping in, telling me to hurry up.
Connor, sorry to jump in. I'm not telling you to hurry up, because I want to lengthen the time here. We're supposed to the video, but I'm not going to use it. Johnny, hello to you. Thank you so much for taking.
Hi, Arthur.
Really interested in that post-harvest discussion, because half the time, well, not half the time, all of the time, when I pick up an avocado in the UK, is as hard as a brick. So how can it be managed? And how, I mean, we have to wait 2 weeks for it to ripen, but your point about it being delicate at picking point, where is this post-harvest loss on avocado?
It's interesting, and Arthur, really nice to meet you. And I think it's a very interesting trade-off that I have to say we don't have a specific answer for it, because here's the trade. When we were running, our mango and banana business, because we were making pulp, we needed an absolute consistency that went through the product so that we could supply it to innocents and people like this. And what that meant was we erected 24 60-ton per piece ripening chambers so that we could move the fruit through the chambers and precisely work on how they ripened. Now, in avocado, part of the challenge is that it's going to come hard off the tree, and you want it to, because once a ripening process starts, and I'm being very glib about it, but in general, once a ripening process starts, you can't stop it. It will carry on. And of course, that means that then maybe I'm having to make a decision about not putting it on the ship after, but maybe I'm having then to put it on a plane. And if I'm putting it on a plane, then of course that trade-off is carbon and all the other things that we also are right to be concerned about. I think if you look at the people who do it professionally, they are running a system of ripening chambers to get it to a certain point. I also know an excellent company run by a Palestinian, an Israeli, and an Indian group who have got an in-the-bag ripening system. And by the way, they're very big bags, where you can control some of that ripening in the process and still ship it out on a ship. So there's some interesting technology out there in the market. And by the way, those bags are all organic, so it's not got nasty chemicals in it. But it really depends on who we're trying to get it to. If it's rock hard in the supermarket, then I would say already that there may be some other quality problems.
Thank you, Johnny, for answering that. So, Connor, you inspired us to look at Mexico. You're talking about a vast majority of the avocados produced in the world comes out of Mexico. In Ireland, you said, is it 90% of the avocados sold in Ireland are from Mexico? And then
yeah, not 90% of half of the avocado globally grown in Mexico. Up to 90% of what we have here in Ireland is grown in Mexico in terms of wholesale supermarkets. And there's very little access for us to get a European, like Spanish or so on, avocado.
And part of the reason why you chose not to put avocados on your menu was the impact that the avocado farms were having on the Mexican land, because they were basically cutting down virgin forests and trees to plant avocados, which were then going to be making money for probably large corporations rather than local farmers. So we need to find solutions, right? So Johnny's looking at solutions out in Africa, and then we're trying to find solutions perhaps closer to home in Europe. Would you say, from a chef's opinion, if you're Mexican, then you should be buying Mexican avocados, right? Or should we be importing them? Or if we're producing avocados in Africa, then we should be importing them to Europe, or we should be consuming them in Africa, because we can grow avocados in Europe, not quite in Ireland or Bristol, but we can. So we do have solutions. So I wonder what your opinion is on that. And then we're going to run a video to show European solutions to avocados. So, Connor, just a quick point on Mexico, Africa, and European avocados, and then we're going to do it.
I think that's the $1 million question. For me, when I'm looking at a food system, okay, as a chef, right, and you're the exact same, Arthur, that looking at local seasonal food is so important. But as you planted in my head about 2 years ago, food is global. Food has to travel and will always have to travel. So while local food is important, you have to import food. Like food that you don't have access to grow in the country you live in needs to travel. So when I'm looking at food we can't grow in Ireland that we're bringing in to the country, to me, it's about the effects it has on climate. So for instance, like that, if an avocado in Mexico is having huge climate effects and an avocado in Spain is not, but I can't get the avocado in Spain, but then I'm not going to sell avocados. And that's just how we sit on it. So if I'm in Mexico, should I buy Mexican avocados? No, because we still have the problems. We're still producing this. It's like in Ireland, we don't use farm fish.
One sec, Rob.
There's plenty of ingredients here in Ireland that we don't use that are grown in Ireland because they're not grown sustainably. And I think that's the important thing. I think you got to look at food globally, but you got to look at food locally, but you've also got to look at the impact of both local food and global food.
Nice one, Connor. Thanks, brother. Good to see you, and thanks so much for joining us. Okay, Tom, I wonder if you could help us by running the next video that we're going to be giving sort of examples of the European avocado growing and how chefs can lock into that.
Humans are the only animal able to convert an infinite resource into a finite resource. All natural resources are designed to regenerate, but human beings and their activities can interrupt their natural life cycle. Our activities influence how water, flora, fauna and soils are used or transformed, and at what speed they do so. Agriculture is an essential activity whose purpose is to grow food. Human, mechanical and natural resources are used to achieve this. Efficiency in the use of these resources will determine whether the cultivated agricultural product is viable both on an environmental and socio-economic level. Human beings, with their experience and learning capacity, are able to minimize the environmental impact generated by agricultural activities. But the variable that plays the key role, vis-a-vis impact, is the climate of the location where the crop is grown. Water is an essential resource for all agricultural activities. People can influence how it's used, so that it remains a lasting resource over the years. In recent years, water consumption in avocado and mango cultivation has been in the spotlight. The water consumption involved in the production of tropical fruits has been optimized in recent years. Research centers such as La Mayora in Malaga, Spain, are undertaking projects related to the efficient use of irrigation water in agriculture, a fundamental resource for the socio-economic development of southern Europe.
Yo no creo que se vaya a sufrir una desertificación por cultivar subtropicales en el sur de España. Si hay una desertificación en el futuro va a ser por el cambio climático. Y esa va a ocurrir independientemente de qué tipo de cultivos tengamos, ¿no? Lo que tenemos que hacer es adaptarnos a ese cambio climático o luchar contra ese cambio climático, ambas cosas, ¿no? El hecho de cultivar cultivos tropicales con regadío en el sur de España puede ser incluso beneficioso porque estamos fijando carbono. Tenemos unos terrenos que no son productivos y si no los regamos prácticamente no hay fijación de carbono. Si estamos cultivando de manera sostenible, estamos fijando carbono, estamos aumentando también la diversidad de fauna en las plantaciones y por tanto podemos ayudar a mitigar el cambio climático.
The amount of water needed to produce a kilo of avocados in Spain is 700 litres on average. Technical improvements in irrigation over the last decade, as well as meticulous control of plant growth, have reduced this figure to below 400 litres per kilo of avocados at some farms. This amount of water may seem high. The amount needed to produce 1 kilo of avocados in Spain is less than that of other fruits. For example, apples need 822 litres per kilo, nectarines need 910 litres per kilo, and cereals such as maize can use up to 1,222 litres per kilo, more than double that of avocados. In southern Spain, the water-related needs of avocados are well below the world average, which is 1,981 litres per kilo. Maria is a young farmer from Malaga, Spain, who grows organic mangoes and avocados. When she finished her degree, she joined her family's farming project. The first thing she did was to convince her family to certify their farms with a European Union organic farming label. Today, Maria is one of the promoters of the Tropiterranean movement. This movement is formed by European-based farmers who grow and sell tropical fruit while respecting natural resources. One of Maria's main concerns for a viable mango production is water.
Es por ello que decidimos optar por un sistema de agua autosuficiente y ecológico. Aquí, los meses en los que llueve son los meses en los que la planta no necesita el agua realmente. Entonces decidimos que el agua de lluvia que acaba directamente en el mar, poder aprovecharla antes de que llegue a él. Por ello hicimos un sistema de canalización. Tenemos unas guías de canalización por toda la finca que recolecta todo el agua y la redirige a una balsa. Las zonas más bajas se redirige el agua mediante un motor y pues después esa agua la vamos recolectando durante todo el otoño, el invierno y la primavera y es la que utilizamos para regar durante el verano.
Jose Antonio is also another young farmer who combines his university studies with helping at the family-run business. This new generation of farmers uses social media platforms to solve the doubts of European consumers. On many occasions, they receive inquiries from people concerned about water consumption and whether the climate in their area is ideal for growing avocados.
La costa tropical de Granada y alargando un poco más hacia la Axarquía es un microclima tropical que hay en Europa, único, que es el que permite el cultivo de tropicales y subtropicales que solo podrían darse en Sudamérica o en algunos países asiáticos o en algunos países de Centroáfrica.
El uso de agua es inferior al que puede haber en otros países, como por ejemplo en Israel, que tienen que regar más, o por ejemplo en la costa del Perú. El uso de agua de riego para aguacate en España pues puede ser la mitad de la que hace falta en la costa del Perú, que es mucho más desértico que en nuestro caso, ¿no?
In this part of southern Spain, where just a few miles separate the sea from the mountains, farmers have plenty of water. Damian uses water from the snowmelt of the Sierra Nevada National Park to irrigate his fields on the La Reala farm. This water is stored in the Rules Dam and distributed to farmers for irrigation. This dam is part of the new infrastructure created by the government to promote the development of economically viable tropical crops in the area. These crops create employment during the quieter months for tourism, the other major industry in the region.
El agua en la finca la gestionamos de una manera muy sostenible. Nosotros partimos de la base que nuestra agua viene de las cumbres de Sierra Nevada. Aquí están canalizadas todas y las repartimos por diferentes cuencas o acuíferos y las canalizamos hasta llegar a la finca. Si nosotros ese agua no la estuviéramos utilizando, pues iría directamente al mar.
Es de sumo interés que el consumidor europeo considere el producto producido en España como un producto local. Tenemos una huella de carbono por transporte mínima comparada con los frutos tropicales que pueden llegar de América, ¿no? o de África. El producto tropical producido en España está muy cerca del consumidor y nos llega en muy pocas horas. Por tanto, tenemos una menor huella de carbono, pero es que además podemos recolectar la fruta en el estado óptimo de maduración. Eso ha permitido la fijación de población rural que no ha tenido que emigrar a las ciudades. Entonces, cuando visitamos las provincias de Málaga y Granada, vemos que tienen gente viviendo en los pueblos y eso es gracias en gran parte a ese tipo de agricultura que les permite vivir en su lugar de origen sin necesidad de desplazarse a las grandes ciudades.
Avocados and mangoes grown in Europe travel far less time and fewer miles than other tropical fruits that we can find. Agricultural movements like Tropiterranium are creating a direct farm-to-table sales channel that rewards farmers who grow crops responsibly. People are increasingly aware of the impact generated by their consumption habits. Our purchasing decisions can create jobs in rural areas and decide the future of the European agricultural landscape. Buying directly from the farmer raises awareness and generates a more intermediate impact.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This crowd farming as an option for a European consumption of avocados and mangoes is an interesting one, and one that's come that I spotted as part of the Chef's Manifesto doing its homework on avocados and both globally and perhaps more locally. And so I'd like to invite Vidal from Crowd Farming and Alexandra from Crowd Farming to come in and let's talk a little bit about the options around avocados, but also the interesting relationship that chefs and the general public can build with the capacity of adopting an avocado tree, because we talked about that, didn't we? About how we can engage more closely with these sort of these tropical or considered to be tropical fruits, avocados and mangoes, but grown in Europe and connecting directly to markets here in the UK and in Europe.
Yes, as we said a bit, like building on what Tristan said or Karina, we actually have to think about shared goals, about community, about companionship, and in this sense, crowd farming meets this requirement, because we are an online platform where farmers and consumers connect directly without intermediaries. And what is particular, as you said, is the adoption model that we use, meaning that consumers do not buy a single box of fruit, but they actually adopt a tree or a piece of garden. And then when the harvest comes, they receive their harvest corresponding from that adoption, right? So for us as consumers, it is pretty powerful, because we are following the whole cultivation and production process every step of the way. And once actually when we receive the fruit or the food, we exactly know who produced it, how, and when. So this is an incredible transparency that actually the traditional food supply chain lacks of. Here, as a consumer, you have this direct connection with the farmer and with the production of the food, right? And then the adoption also makes it for the farmer, it makes it possible for the farmer to produce on demand. So here what we are actually tackling is this problem of food waste that we are talking about. We talk a lot about food waste at homes, at households, in restaurants, but we also actually know that there's a lot of food waste on this very top level of the funnel in the origin where the food is produced. So as the farmer actually produces on demand, they can adjust all the resources, they can adjust the production they have, and this way we can also lessen the food waste that is taking place right now. And there is also a very important aspect in terms of fair trade, because in the traditional food supply chain, as you probably know, farmers normally do not even know what is the price they are going to sell their harvest for. In our system, in our model, they actually know the price up front, so they actually can plan all their activity. And also, if you think about farming as a business activity that it is for them, it makes so much more sense. And of course, as they get the price up front, they get the price that they want, it also has a huge impact on local communities, on revitalizing rural areas. And as you could see in the video, that people actually can stay, they can live off their land, they can stay in their hometowns or home villages and keep on living and make the living there, right? Yeah. And there is also a third winner. We call this model win-win-winner, because there's a third winner, which is the environment, actually, because what we are very concerned about is, as you could see also in the video, is the sustainable cultivation, sustainable production of the food. So that's one point. The other sustainable aspect is that as the fruit travels directly from the tree to the doorstep of the end consumer, so there are no warehouses, there is no storage, there are no intermediaries where also the energy is wasted in a way, right? And in the third aspect, there is also a transportation. We are experts in the first mile distribution, which means that the fruit travels directly from the farm to each particular household, and it also helps us to optimize the carbon footprint that we generate in the transportation. So in the nutshell, that would be the crowdfunding model that hopefully we are here not just as a part of conversation, but also the solution, right?
Oh, a fabulous solution, and one that we really wanted to use as an example of, if you're building nutrition into your lifestyle and you're using avocados as part of your nutritional plan, then what is the balance that you create? If you're going to be buying avocados from a global platform to base your nutritional requirements on, then is your nutrition and the quest for better nutrition actually going to negatively impact nature? So what would be really interesting is that from a European perspective, if you are going to build in a nutritional aspect to your meal, because avocados, everyone's gone, avocados, they're the superfood, we need them in our diets, but it's actually impacting on nature, huge market for Mexican avocados, but it's doing the detrimental effect to the Mexican forests, and perhaps water usage in other parts of the world. So there's this nutrition versus nature concept, which is really interesting, and one that, from a European perspective, nutritionally, can be supportive and less impactful.
Yes, I think it is important to remember, as we already said a few times here, nothing is black and white. This is not about the avocados that are bad or bananas that are bad or any other thing that maybe in the future we will decide that is bad from mediatic point of view. This is about, details, about understanding how things are, or food in this case, how it is produced, where does it come from, what does it involve, how was it actually transported. So it's about our responsibility, as Karina said before, about our responsibility also as consumers to say, okay, this is not only about the labels, this is not about the particular fruit, this is about really getting into it and really understanding and really holding companies, in this case also, or food production companies, accountable for what they are doing. So I think this is actually the important part of this discussion.
And Vidal, if I can ask you, from a chef's perspective, because we've got chefs, yes. 50% of the guests and panelists here are chefs. From a commercial aspect and crowd farming or a sustainable solution to avocados and mangoes and these tropical fruits, is there a commercial angle the way chefs can engage with you, or is it just anybody can approach, they can buy as they like, and you'll deliver it to their door? Is that right?
Anyone can buy the fruit from the person, because as Alexandra said, the price is a fair price. It's the same price for all the persons. So if you want to adopt a tree, the price is the same for you as a commercial aspect that for other person, because the farmer will receive the same amount of money. We don't make discount, because the fruit doesn't have this discount. We program the fruit, how the fruit is given to the persons. So the price is the same all around the year for the season.
Okay. And Vidal, I know that you're a Tropiterranean specialist.
Yes.
Before we move on, can you just explain Tropiterranean?
Okay.
Yes,
because many customers from Europe doesn't eat tropical fruits because they feel guilty that they came from far away, and they even doesn't know that in Europe we can grow tropical fruits. So Tropiterranean is a movement from the agricultors, for the farmers. It's not a movement for that came from the top, from the bottom. Is emergent, going from the bottom to the tops, and this is a movement that supports like tropical European fruit as a supply chain. We can have tropical fruits as a local product in Europe. So this is the main important thing about the Tropiterranean, that Mediterranean tropical fruit grows in the Mediterranean Sea.
Okay, so tropical fruit growing in a Mediterranean environment, Tropiterranean.
Yes.
It's the hot word in the crowd, everyone. Chef's Manifesto, Tropiterranean. Connor, can I just bring you in? I don't know if you're still around. So avocados on your menu, if they were crowd farmed and brought to your menus in Ireland, what do you think?
I think absolutely. I think if I can get sustainable avocados, like any other ingredient that I want to be sustainable, then it can go on the menus, because I know that the demand is there. It's a popular fruit. Lots of people want to eat it. Lots of people want to see it on menus. And I have to say that when we didn't ever use it, we got a lot of questions as to why we're not using it. And as a customer, I want to eat it. And we'd stand around and go, well, no, and this is why. So, I mean, if I can get access to a fantastic, like that video we just seen where avocados are grown in that way, and I can get access to that into the Irish market, but then absolutely they would make an appearance on our menu.
Connor, thank you so much for helping us present the Avocados on Parole. We're finishing this section now. Vidal, Alexandra, thank you so much for coming and talking to us from a crowd farming perspective. The video tells a fabulous story, but it's good to hear about the Tropiterranean and how crowd farming works. Alexandra Vidal, would you like to say anything before we move on?
No, I don't know if there are any questions, but just that we are thrilled to be here, and thank you for having us as the part of conversation.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Any questions, please put them into either the Q&A or the chat box, and Alexandra Vidal will be around a little while longer to be able to answer those questions, because we need to move into the future.